여러분 안녕하십니까, 돌콩입니다. 그간 잘 지내셨나요? 저도 잘 지냈습니다. 잠깐 한국 갔다 와서 다시 미국에 들어와 있습니다. 2025년 한 해를 마무리하는 시점입니다. 한 해 동안 여러분들 좋은 책들 많이 읽으셨습니까? 또 어떤 책을 지금 이 순간 읽고 계신가요? 2025년 저는 한 해 동안 일은 사실 조금 덜 했지만 남편의 레이오프와 또 여러 가지 문제들이 맞물려서 어떻게 보면 좀 불안정하고도 불확실하고도 가끔은 불안했던 그런 한 해를 보냈습니다. 그러면서 저는 고전에 대한 관심이 좀 생기기 시작했던 한 해가 아니었나 싶어요. 오랜 시간을 그 자리에서 버텨온 텍스트들에는 어떠한 함의들과 사색들이 담겨 있을까? 그리고 이 불안함을 느끼는 인간은 나 혼자도 아닐 테고 내가 처음도 아닐 텐데 과연 사람들은 오랜 시간 동안 그러한 감정들을 어떻게 처리해 왔는가를 보고 싶기도 했기 때문이 아니었나 싶어요. 그런데 굉장히 힘들고 어려웠던 시기에 고전을 탐독하고 그 세계로 깊숙이 걸어 들어감으로써 그 시기를 극복하고 또 앞으로 나갈 희망을 얻었다는 분이 계셔서 오늘 모셨습니다. 놀라실걸요, 여러분들. 바로 SF계의 거장 켄 리우 작가님이십니다. 켄 리우 작가님 여러분들 너무 잘 아시죠? 종이동물원으로 많이들 알고 계실 거라 생각하고요. 네뷸러상, 휴고상, 세계환상문학상 등등 상을 휩쓸고 계신 작가님이십니다. 그리고 여러분들이 많이 아시는 그 류치신의 3체, Three Body Problems를 그 중국어에서 영어로 번역하신 번역가이기도 하십니다. 켄 리우 작가님은 팬데믹 때 더 이상 글을 쓰고 싶지 않아지셨다고 해요. 그래서 굉장히 힘든 시기를 보내시다가 고전, 특히 작가님께는 그게 노자의 도덕경이었습니다. 그 책을 탐독하기 시작하면서 앞으로 나갈 힘, 다시 시작해볼 그 위로를 얻으셨다고 해서 그 이야기가 궁금해서 오늘 모셨습니다. 작가님이 이 도덕경을 어떻게 읽으시고 또 해석해 주셨는지에 관한 책이 이번에 한국에서 출간이 되었어요. 저도 한국에 갔을 때 사왔습니다. 길을 찾는 책, 도덕경이라는 책이고요. 고전들이 좀 그런 게 있는데 처음 접근이 용이하지 않은 경우가 있잖아요. 약간 겁먹게 되는 게 있는데 켄 리우 작가님께서 워낙 탁월한 그 스토리텔러이시다 보니까 아주 재미있게 접근하실 수 있도록 또 풍부하게 해석할 수 있도록 중간중간에 해설이 들어가 있습니다. 보시면 저도 굉장히 열심히 메모하면서 줄 그으면서 읽었고 사실 한 번만 읽어서 되는 텍스트는 아니고 곁에 두면서 좀 음미하고 또 나가서 삶을 살면서 생각을 해보고 삶을 돌아보고 이렇게 거울같이 읽을 수 있는 평생 가지고 갈 수 있는 텍스트가 아닌가 싶습니다. 엄마한테도 한 권 선물했거든요. 텍스트가 따뜻하지 않아요. 굉장히 솔직하고 담백합니다. 그럼에도 그 사이에서 느껴지는 그 단단한 위로들, 분명히 느낄 수 있는 희망들을 여러분들도 한 해를 마무리하면서 또 새로운 한 해를 준비하면서 꼭 느껴보셨으면 좋겠습니다. 또 켄 리우 작가님 아주 흥미로운 이력을 갖고 계신 작가님이십니다. 하버드 대학교에서 영문학과 컴퓨터과학을 전공하시고 소프트 엔지니어로도 일을 하시고 또 로스쿨, 하버드 로스쿨에 가셔서 또 변호사로도 활동을 하셨거든요. 그러면서 계속 글을 쓰시고 출간을 하시다가 이제 전업 작가로 전향을 하셨죠. 대화를 마무리하면서 작가님의 커리어와 글쓰기에 관한 이야기도 조금 여쭤봤습니다. 노자도 그런 얘기를 합니다만 언어의 한계성 그리고 번역을 하시는 분이기 때문에 언어가 완벽할 수 없다는 것에 관해서 굉장히 많은 생각을 하시는 분인 것 같아서 그럼에도 불구하고 왜 우리가 글 쓰는 삶을 살게 되는가에 관한 이야기들 그리고 더 좋은 글을 쓰려면 어떤 연습을 해야 하는가 그런 이야기들 제 관심사이기도 해서 여쭤봤거든요. 글쓰기에 관심이 있으신 분들께 많은 도움이 됐으면 좋겠네요.
Hi, Sunny.
Hello! How are you?
Good, how are you?
I know you are in Singapore and it's very late over there.
No problem at all.
Have you seen your book published in Korea? The new
I
one?
have. They show me a picture of the cover, but I don't think I've seen the final book finished.
That's the reason why I'm having it here. So this is it. So I got it last Friday.
Lovely.
It came out last Friday. You start by talking about your experience during pandemic. You did a lot of things. It seems like you fixed your old game controller, you baked, and one of the things that you did is you start reading Laozi's text. So when you picked up the book, what were you looking for and what kind of questions were you trying to answer?
It was a very strange time. Not so much that the world was ending, but that it was taking a pause. I guess that's how I felt. And it felt like things could go in any direction. And there was a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of conflict in the world at that moment. And it just felt like nothing was safe. Surely this is not the first time in the history of our species that something like this happened. We did, as a species, survive till now. So what did great thinkers of the past think in moments like this? How did words from thousands of years ago survive until this moment? If something survived that long, there must be something deep and eternal and true in it. That's what got me started to read the Dao De Jing.
But there are many different classics. Why Lao Tzu's text?
There's something about the idea of a book that is premised on the way, the path through something dark. The image of the yin-yang symbol with that curved division between light and darkness, it appealed to me. And I wanted to see there's some way for me to really actually get to know it. Instead of just knowing it by reputation. Because my experience has always been that when you think you know something by reputation, the reality was always very different. There's this philosophical argument that I'm sure you've heard where, there's a young girl who is inside this room where everything is black and white, but she also has access to books. And so she reads everything humanity has ever written about color. So she reads about what it's like to experience the color red, what it's like to experience the color yellow, what it's like to see the blue sky. And she reads about everything, reads and reads and reads and reads. And she thinks she knows what color is about. And then one day the door to her room opens and she sees colors for the first time. And it is different. It's not the same as reading about color. It's like that. When I thought I knew what Dao De Jing was about, but then I read it, and I realized that I was wrong. Lao Tzu was nothing like how I imagined he would be, and the Dao De Jing was so much richer, so much more interesting than the way I had been led to believe what the text was like. So I knew that was the case. I knew that when you encounter a classic in reality for the first time, it will be different than your idea of it. So, I was prepared. But even so, reading it was a shock.
I wanted to know how you read this book. I mean, what I mean by how here is like, did you thumb through from cover to cover in one day and go back? Or did you read commentaries and references? I mean, it was first time for me to read through your book. It was very interesting to say the least, but it was a lot of paradox and there are a lot of antonyms in one sentence, and you use this word, the trawling. I 100% agree. Sometimes it sounds like that, and I feel like he would have been a very successful social influencer if he lived in this era, right? But also, it is very poetic, and by poetic, what I'm trying to say is it requires a lot of reader's interpretation. You have to go out and live a life and come back. You cannot just sit down and finish the book in one sitting. You will have to read, breathe, and come back. The same text may feel different, and some people probably don't like it. Some people are looking for clear answers. They don't like obscure things and ambiguous stuff. How did you read this? What was your way of reading this text?
Oh yeah, no, I love your question. It's a great question because how you read something is such a big part of the kind of meaning you can extract from it, and how you read it changes your relationship to the text. The way I read it was I read it multiple times, going through it much like a book of poetry. I would read every verse and then think about it. And then if I wasn't totally clear on what it meant, I would just write some notes for myself and say, okay, I'll come back to this later. I'll read the next one. So I read the whole thing through. And then I was like, wow, I have so many questions. I don't know what he means by sitting contentedly like a swallow in the mud. I don't know what it means to say that you want to be as at peace as a newborn, because newborns are not at peace. I don't know what he means by the more knowledge you have, the less wisdom you have. I have no idea what any of these things mean. I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and look up other people's interpretation and see if those interpretations will help me understand this better. So I started reading commentaries. I read commentaries from all over the world. I read the classical tradition, over thousands of years, lots and lots of scholars. Later on, I looked up commentary by modern scholars. And then I realized that the book itself, the text that we have itself, was only the result of a long editorial tradition. It's only until the 20th century that we realized that the text as we receive it was not actually perhaps the way it was originally composed, because we found new surviving scrolls that showed us even the order of the chapters was very different. There was so much to learn. It turns out that this one book was sort of the tip of an iceberg. And then something interesting happened, which is the more I read of the commentary, the more I wanted to go back to the original text again and look at them again anew. And the more I read the commentary, the more I felt that they were inadequate to actually explaining what the original was trying to say, because it was like I discovered all these new interpretations only to realize that the original contained even more interpretations. So I pushed aside the commentaries and I went back to the original. And I had to remember to actually forget as much of the commentary as I could so that I could then really see the text again for myself for the first time. It was like I was trying to practice what Lao Tzu was saying. You had to actually forget the wisdom, forget the knowledge in order to actually truly see the wisdom. So the metaphor I use is, it's like I was a child walking in the woods looking for a dragon, right? I was like, I want to see this dragon. I want to see this powerful creature. And I looked around and I couldn't see the dragon. And then other people said, well, you may not see the dragon, but here's a scholarly article about what dragons do. You can read this. And then somebody else said, well, here's some fossils of dragons from long ago, and here are some footprints from the dragon, and here are some scales that the dragon dropped. So I was studying all of these things, and only after I'd studied all of these things did I realize that these are still just traces and echoes and shadows of the dragon. They're not the dragon. But in that moment, as I looked up, it was as though the dragon actually flew over me. And I could finally actually see the dragon. And so I was like, oh, wow, it is truly so much more wondrous to look at the dragon rather than to focus on the footprints and the trails and the scales. It was like that. Only after I had forgotten all the commentary could I actually understand the text anew again. And that's how I read it. It was this really, really a wonderful experience of approaching the text anew, being confused, reading a lot of commentary, and realizing that I actually had to forget all of it and go back to the text again.
We are very used to that. When we are confused by the text and when we are not clear about what we are reading, we kind of look for the answers and we rely on, other material. And I do have that reading habit too, because we cannot bear with that instability or confusion, I guess. So for the people who are starting their journey to find the dragon, would you just recommend focusing on their senses and go for the journey without studying too much about it?
I would say you have to trust yourself. Everybody, in the same way that, Lao Tzu says, the way that can be spoken is not the way that can be named is not the way. Everybody has to find the path or the way by their own path, if that makes sense. If the way for you to make sense of it is to read lots of commentary and then coming back to the text again, then just do that. If the way for you is to read it and then to forget about it and then just go meditate on your own and come back to it again, then do that. And maybe your way is to read it now and not feel much for it and to go away and live your life and return to the text maybe 20 years later. And now it will mean something to you. I think everybody's going to end up finding a different path to it. What matters is to follow your own path and to trust that if you are meant to have this kind of connection with the text, you will find it.
It sounds like you put a lot of efforts to pursue this dragon. What was the charm, in your opinion, of this dragon slash Dao De Jing? Like, what has changed in you after reading it?
Gosh, it's so hard to put into
That's
words.
a big question. Yeah.
Yeah, here's what happened to me. Before I started reading the Dao De Jing in depth, I was having trouble writing. My life was about telling stories and writing books. And during this period of time, in the middle of the pandemic, when everything felt so dark, I couldn't write at all. I lost faith in the very act of telling a story. It felt so fake to make up stories when conspiracy theories were swirling around and stories were causing people to be at each other's throats. The very idea of making up stories felt like just a meaningless thing. I didn't want to do it anymore. Pursuing this wisdom, following the words that have survived and given comfort and direction to so many people over thousands of years, allowed me to have hope again. That's kind of the way I think of it.
Positivity is sometimes enforced, and people are saying you should feel positive and, positive vibe only. And when people are talking about toxic positivity, you shouldn't enforce positivity to someone. I didn't really know how to feel hope. These texts are not like really nice or kind. I think sometimes it's like very straight and sometimes blunt. Being able to feel the hope is a very interesting experience to me. Without enforcing feeling positive or saying something positive, you kind of feel still hopeful, and it's a kind of some consolation. It was an interesting experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think another book that worked somewhat like that, is the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Yes.
And I think if Marcus Aurelius and Lao Tzu were to get together, I think they would have some very interesting conversations. I think the great thing about the Dao De Jing was, like, as you point out, there were a lot of passages where it's very stark and honest and dark, and very spare. There's no empty hope in it. One of my favorite passages from the Dao De Jing is this part where Lao Tzu says, "Heaven and earth are not benevolent." He was obviously specifically critiquing the Confucian idea about benevolence or zhen as a concept, because Confucianism is very much focused on the idea of zhen, which is often translated as humanity or humanism or benevolence. This idea that this kind of specific kind of human-centric love is key to happiness, to wisdom, to meaning. But Lao Tzu says, no, heaven and earth don't have this concept of human-centric benevolence. In the eyes of heaven and earth, we are nothing more than straw dogs, which is this incredible image. How are humans like straw dogs? To be discarded. Straw dogs are basically sacrificial idols, to be discarded after a religious ceremony. It's really very, very striking, and I couldn't make sense of it. But fundamentally, what this part is saying is, don't be so human-centric in the way you view everything in the universe. The universe will go on without you. The universe will go on without us. And yet, that doesn't mean that we're meaningless. That doesn't mean that we're just empty vessels. We are, like straw dogs, yearning for meaning. But the only way for us to actually find meaning is for us to give in ourselves to the pattern between heaven and earth, to become part of that universal cycle, that breath, that endless movement. Only when we are happy in immersing ourselves in that movement will we find our own peace, our own happiness. And I think, philosophers from all through history have said things like that. We are finite creatures living in an infinite universe. And the only way for us to accept that is to become part of that infinity, to give ourselves up to the pattern of nature itself. But I think Lao Tzu is the one who has said that the clearest, or at least I find the way he said it to be the most poetic and poignant and moving. And so I find hope in a passage like that, which seems so hopeless. And that's the paradox of it. But, a lot of great philosophers are like that. They tell you something that feels very unsparing, unsentimental. And then after you've understood it, you nod and say, that is how it is. And in that acceptance and understanding, I find peace.
So this book that I'm holding is a very interesting because you translated Dao De Jing in English, and now we have Korean translation of your translation of Dao De Jing in English, right? You talk about translation a little bit, and you say no translation is a neutral, and it is kind of meant to be flawed. There is no perfect translation, right? How do you want Korean readers to read your translated text in Korean?
Wow, that's a great question. So I myself, I'm not capable of reading Korean, so I can't actually comment specifically on the translation, although from everything I've heard, the translation is amazing and it's an incredibly beautiful piece of work on its own. And I think that's where I would start, which is to treat the translation as a beautiful piece of work on its own, something that is its own independent work of art. So I would say that when readers are reading it, don't always focus on the fact that it is a translation or on the fact that something must have been lost in the translation, but rather to focus on the text as its own thing, and to engage with it as its own thing. In the same way that, humans have read translations of the Bible for millennia. I mean, think about how many people have read the Bible in English and received so much beauty and comfort in it without having read it in its Koine original. I would ask Korean readers to do the same with this translation and to not treat it as a translation, but as an independent piece of art and to take it as such. So my career is sort of all over the place, if you look at it, right? So I started out as a software engineer, then I went to law, and then I actually practiced as a lawyer in private practice for a number of years. And then I became a litigation consultant for high-tech cases. Basically, I explain to judges and juries how a piece of technology works, and I review source code and all that before becoming a full-time writer. I was also writing and publishing the whole time. And to me, all of these things were connected because they were all, in some sense, storytelling exercises. As a lawyer, obviously, I was trying to craft stories to convince.
When you decided to go to the law school or when you decided to study CS in college, was that your thought process? I'm drawn to the storytelling and, through this major...
No, not at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
I was interested in it.
You were just drawn to that. Okay, got it.
I was interested in playing with programs. I was interested in thinking about legal systems. I was interested in trying to understand how the world functioned through these symbol systems. It's only much later that I came to sort of see that all of these are patterns, ways of understanding the universe through human mental patterns. And the most human mental pattern of all is storytelling.
How did your life look like when you had to write and work as a software engineer and lawyer? Chaotic?
There were definitely some very difficult times. I mean, for example, I wrote much of the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty, my big epic fantasy. I wrote that while I was practicing as a lawyer. And so most of that book was written in 500-word chunks on the commuter rail, basically the train I took in to work every morning. That was the only time I could find to work on the book. And so I had to write them in little short chunks. It's also why much of my early publication consisted of short stories, because those were the only things I could write while I was working and trying to, have a family with two young kids.
How much do you translate? What is the ratio between writing creatively and translate?
Translation these days makes up less than 1% of what I do. The Laozi's Dao De Jing was probably the last major thing that I translated. I would love to do another one like it in the future, but only an important piece of classical text that really speaks to me in some way. Earlier on in my career, because I wanted to help my friends in China find publication in English, I did a lot of translation of their work into English. But these days, I don't do that anymore since there are so many more professional translators who are interested in doing that kind of work. So there's no need for me to do it. So I would only translate if it's something that really speaks to me. And Laozi's Dao De Jing, qualifies. It's something that feels to me very rich and where I feel like I can actually offer a new interpretation that's interesting. In the future, if something like that comes up again, I would love to do it again. But absent that kind of thing, I'm just a writer these days. I'm very focused on my own fiction and trying to find my own dragon and trying to capture it.
Do you think translation make you a better writer, Ken? Or did you do it because you're just interested in the work itself? Are they related? Becoming a good writer and becoming a good translator?
This is a really good question. I think somebody like Le Guin, who also did some translation, would say that translation would help you understand language better, would help you understand your tool, your craft better. Because, as writers, our medium, right, is linguistic. We work with words. And if that's the case, then the more we do with words, the better we understand how language functions and the more supplely we can wield it. But I also think it's one of those things where you have to be very deliberate with it. You have to be very, very careful about how you're honing your craft. I think translating something like the Dao De Jing definitely helped because here's a text in which the author is very explicit about being skeptical about language. So that forces me in the translation process to be also very skeptical and very, very analytical, but also very creative with language.
If not translation, what was the most, I don't like asking this kind of question, but I am just curious about your answer, so I have to ask. What was the most effective way of honing your craft?
I would say deliberate practice, meaning challenging yourself to write in genres you're not comfortable with, challenging yourself to try to do things that you think you're not good at. I think as a writer, pushing yourself deliberately to do things that scare you, that make you feel uncomfortable when it comes to language, fiction, and writing will help you hone your craft more. So even if you end up not specifically publishing in those experimental genres, it will still help you. In the same way that, I think often the advice is given to prose writers to practice poetry, because even if you're not going to become a poet, practicing deliberately writing poetry will make you a better prose writer, and vice versa.
The reason why that helps is because your scope is getting bigger, or you understand about other areas that you're not interested in?
It's a bunch of different things. One is it forces you to re-examine your chosen genre, your own craft, from a different perspective. By forcing yourself to do something that you naturally would not be inclined to do, you may be inspired to use some of those techniques in your own work that you wouldn't otherwise use. But I think most of all, it just sort of enlarges your space of possibilities by learning a bunch of techniques that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily force yourself to learn. You now have a larger repertoire of techniques to use when you're actually doing your own creation.
Taoism warns against the obsession over words and text a lot. And I remember there are parts, languages or texts are merely dead traces. That's kind of that lingered. What makes you still commit your life to writing?
Words are inadequate. Words are, in fact, not sufficient. And yet, sometimes there are things we want to convey, and we don't have any better way of conveying it other than through words. So we must then learn to use words to say what cannot be said in words. And that, to me, has always been the most potent, powerful, moving image of why we write.
That's the most beautiful answer I could expect. Last question of today, Ken. Is there anything more important than writing in life?
Well, I mean, for me, it's my family. Time with my wife and kids would always come first.
Is this because that makes you happier, or is this also happiness and responsibility?
I feel like it's just something that's deeply human. I feel like, as human beings, we're not...
Wow, great answer.
Gosh. I mean, I feel like human beings were not meant to really spend our energy to enlarging the GDP, right? I feel like we're meant to actually spending as much of our time with people we love and with people who love us. Because, again, we have a very limited amount of time on this planet, in this universe. And that is the best way to spend our time.